I'm excited to be with you today. And before I say anything else, I want to touch and agree with you in the Spirit. For those of you who have invested your faith, your hopes, your trust in the promises of God, know that something is about to shift in the atmosphere. It may not feel like it now, but I want you to understand that your breakthrough is closer than you think. I know some of you are sitting on the edge wondering, when is it going to happen? When will I see the promises of God come to life in my own situation? You've been waiting, you've been sowing, you've been praying, but the answer to your question has been elusive. You've heard about God's promises, you've heard about His miracles, but the when is what keeps you up at night, isn't it? But today I want to render you something powerful. God knows when. He knows the exact moment, the right time, when your season of waiting is over and your season of favor begins. There is no need to fret, no need to worry, because God's timing is never wrong. You may not know when, but He does, and I'm here to tell you that the answer you've been waiting for, the breakthrough you've been longing for, it is coming, because God knows when. So stay with me until the end of this word, because I believe this message will ignite a fire in your spirit and renew your faith in the waiting. The difference between God's timing and human timing is one of the most profound aspects of faith. We live in a world driven by urgency, schedules, and immediate gratification. From the moment we wake up, we are racing against the clock, running to work, meeting deadlines, managing responsibilities, and constantly checking our phones for updates. Everything in our lives seems to revolve around the question of when, but God's timing doesn't operate on the same clock as ours. God's timing is perfect not because it is fast or slow, but because it is deliberate and purposeful. Often we get caught up in the rush of our own lives, wanting things to happen on our timeline. We pray for breakthroughs, healing, financial provision, and restoration, and we want them now. But we must understand that God's timing isn't dictated by our impatience. His timing is a reflection of His infinite wisdom, His deep understanding of what we truly need, and His perfect will for our lives. While we may not always understand why God delays or takes His time, we can trust that His timing is always for our benefit. When we try to rush God's plan, we often miss the deeper work He wants to do in us. Just as seed must first grow underground before it can break through the surface and bear fruit, God often works in the hidden places of our lives. It's in those moments of waiting that He molds our character, strengthens our faith, and prepares us for the blessings that are coming. We want the breakthrough without the process, but God knows that the process is just as important as the outcome. Our growth during the waiting period is essential to sustain the promise when it arrives. We also need to recognize that God's plan includes factors we can't see or comprehend. There are people and circumstances that need to align before His promise is fulfilled. We may think we are ready for the answer, but God knows when we are truly ready. He sees what we cannot see. He knows the future, and He understands the path we must walk to get there. That's why we can rest in the assurance that when God moves, He moves at the right time, not too early and never too late. In addition, God's timing often teaches us patience and perseverance. When we endure through the waiting, we develop a stronger sense of trust in His faithfulness. Waiting on God isn't just about enduring the present moment, it's about trusting that He has a plan that will unfold at the right time. While we may be anxious about the when, God has already ordained the perfect moment. Our job is to remain faithful, continue sowing seeds of faith, and trust that when the time comes, everything will fall into place. So when you find yourself asking, God, when will this happen? When will I see the change I've been praying for? Remember that God's timing is always in motion, even when we can't perceive it. His timing isn't about speed, it's about precision. God knows exactly when to act in your life, when to bring forth your breakthrough, when to heal, when to provide, and when to restore. And while we may not know when, we can rest assured that He does, and that is enough. The concept of God's omniscience, the belief that God knows everything, is both comforting and awe-inspiring. We often say God knows as a reminder that even when we don't understand what's happening in our lives, there is an all-knowing God who sees the bigger picture. God's knowledge isn't limited by time, space, or circumstance. He knows every detail of our lives, past, present, and future, down to the smallest aspects of our existence. This divine awareness extends far beyond human comprehension and offers us a profound sense of security, knowing that no matter what we face, God is fully aware of it all. Omniscience is not just about knowing the facts, it's about understanding the depth of every situation, the inner workings of our hearts, and the long-term consequences of every choice. God doesn't just know what happens, he understands why it happens, how it happens, and what will come of it. He is not limited by time as we are. He sees the beginning and the end all at once, and in his infinite wisdom, he orchestrates events in ways that are beyond our immediate understanding. This knowledge should bring us peace. When life feels chaotic or uncertain, we may be tempted to feel lost or overwhelmed, but we must remember that God knows. He knows the pain we are going through. He knows the challenges we face, and he knows how to bring us through them. Even in moments when we feel alone or abandoned, his omniscient presence is there. We might not know what's around the corner or why things are happening the way they are, but God already has a plan. He knows the full scope of our journey, and he's already working behind the scenes, making preparations for the future, even when we can't see them. God's omniscience doesn't just bring comfort, it challenges us to trust in him more deeply. When we recognize that he knows everything, we are invited to let go of the need for control. As human beings, we want to know everything. We want to understand the details, and we often struggle when we can't figure out how things will unfold. But God's perfect knowledge invites us to trust him with the things we cannot see. It's like a child who trusts their parent, not because they understand the entire situation, but because they believe their parent has everything under control. God's omniscience calls us to surrender our worries and uncertainties, knowing that he holds the answers to all our questions, even the ones we haven't thought to ask. Furthermore, God's omniscience teaches us about his love for us. It's not just that he knows everything, but that he knows us intimately. He understands our deepest desires, our fears, our hopes, and our struggles. His knowledge is not detached or impersonal, it is deeply relational. The fact that he knows everything about us and still loves us is one of the most powerful aspects of his nature. It means that he is not just aware of what we're going through, but he is actively engaged in our lives, knowing exactly what we need, when we need it, and how we need it. When we understand that God knows, it changes how we approach life. We no longer have to operate out of fear or anxiety about the future because we trust that he knows what's best. It also compels us to lean into him more, to seek his wisdom, and to rest in his perfect knowledge. Our limitations don't dictate the outcome, his infinite knowledge does. God's omniscience provides us with the confidence that no matter what happens, he is always in control, always ahead of us, and always working everything out for our good. The phrase "God knows when" is not just a statement of reassurance, but a reminder of the purposeful design behind everything in our lives. In our fast-paced, often unpredictable world, it can be difficult to accept the concept of divine timing. We live in a society that promotes immediate results, quick fixes, and rapid progress. We want things now, and we want them in our time. However, the reality is that God's timing operates on a much deeper, more intentional level, one that transcends our understanding. His timing isn't arbitrary, it's a reflection of his divine wisdom, which knows exactly when the right moment will arrive. When we are in the midst of trials, we often find ourselves asking, why is this happening now? Or why isn't this happening yet? These are valid questions that many of us struggle with when things seem delayed or when the breakthrough we've been praying for feels like it's taking too long. But the truth is, God knows exactly when the right time is to bring us through, to deliver us, and to bring about the change we've been longing for. His timing is not about convenience or speed, it's about what is best for us in the long run. We may not understand why we are going through certain seasons of waiting, but God in his infinite wisdom has already charted out the perfect moment for us to receive his blessings. Understanding that God knows when also teaches us to trust in the unseen. Often our faith is tested not by the storms we face, but by the waiting we must endure. We are eager for answers, for progress, and for resolution, but sometimes the most profound work happens in the stillness. While we wait, God is refining our hearts, shaping our character, and preparing us for the blessings that are to come. It's easy to grow impatient during times of waiting, but we must remember that God's delays are not denials. They are simply opportunities for us to grow in faith and to learn to trust in his perfect timing. There is a certain peace that comes when we accept that God knows when. It allows us to let go of our anxiety and our need to control the situation. We no longer have to wrestle with the uncertainty of when, because we know that God has already set a time. This doesn't mean we should be passive or idle while we wait. Rather, it means we can have confidence in continuing our journey, knowing that God is orchestrating every detail behind the scenes. We can actively walk in faith, doing the things He has called us to do, while trusting that the right moment will come according to His plan. The concept of when is also tied to the promise of God's faithfulness. There is a deep sense of comfort in knowing that God's promises are not bound by our perception of time. In the same way that He made promises to the patriarchs of the faith, He has made promises to us. And just as He fulfilled those promises at the right time in history, He will fulfill His promises in our lives at the right time. His timing is perfect not just because it is exact, but because it aligns with His purpose for our lives. We may be eager for answers, but God knows the right moment for His will to unfold. In moments of doubt or struggle, we must remind ourselves that God's timing is not random. It is not dictated by our desires or the urgency of our circumstances. It is a reflection of His perfect wisdom, which works for our good. When the timing finally arrives, we will see that every moment of waiting was worth it. The things we learned, the growth we experienced, and the lessons we gained will prepare us to handle the blessings He has for us. In the end, when God's timing comes, we will know without a doubt that it was worth the wait. The idea that God knows when speaks to a truth that is at the core of our faith, God's ability to manage and control time in ways we can't fully comprehend. Our lives are filled with moments that seem uncertain or out of control, and it's easy for us to become overwhelmed by the feeling that nothing is happening or that we're stuck in a season of waiting. But this phrase reminds us that even in those moments when we cannot see the progress or understand the delays, God has a perfect plan for when everything will fall into place. He is not only aware of our struggles, but He is actively involved in the timing of our breakthroughs, and His timing is always right. One of the greatest struggles we face as human beings is patience. We often want things to happen immediately, especially when we're in pain or facing challenges. We want the answers, the solution, the miracle to come without delay. However, when we truly grasp the idea that God knows when, we realize that His timing is much more profound than our immediate desires. His timing is not influenced by our impatience, but by a deeper understanding of what will bring us the greatest good. He sees the beginning and the end, the whole picture, while we only see what's right in front of us. This perspective forces us to trust that the process we're going through, though painful or frustrating at times, is part of God's perfect design. Understanding that God has a set time for our breakthrough should help ease the anxiety we often experience during seasons of uncertainty. It's easy to feel like we are stuck in a rut, that things will never change, or that we'll never see the fruits of our labor. However, the knowledge that God knows exactly when the right moment will come should provide a sense of peace. We may not understand why we're going through what we're going through, but we can rest in the assurance that God is at work in the background, orchestrating everything according to highest divine timeline. Our waiting is never in vain, and every delay is purposeful. The concept of God knowing the when also connects us to the idea of trust. Trust is not just about believing in God's ability, it's about believing in His timing. Trusting God means trusting that He has a perfect plan for our lives, and that the delays, the detours, and the seasons of waiting are all part of His plan to bring about the best possible outcome. Trust doesn't come easily. It's a journey that often requires us to let go of our own expectations and desires. We must accept that God may not work on our timeline, but we can trust that He will work everything for our good in His time. When we surrender to God's perfect timing, it also frees us from the need to control every aspect of our lives. We live in a world that values instant gratification and success on our terms, but this mindset can lead to burnout and disappointment when things don't happen according to our schedule. When we understand that God knows when, we can release our need to force things to happen, allowing Him to work in His own way and on His own timeline. This release of control doesn't mean we become passive. It means we become active in our faith, trusting God as we wait and anticipating that His timing will bring about the best outcome. Ultimately, the truth that God knows when serves as a reminder that we are not alone in our waiting. We are not waiting without purpose, and we are not waiting in vain. God is working behind the scenes, preparing us for the blessings that are to come. We may not know when those blessings will arrive, but we can have confidence that they will come at the perfect moment. And when they do, we will know without a doubt that it was worth the wait because it happened in God's time and according to his plan. The knowledge that God knows when is not just a comforting thought, it is a radical declaration of faith. It challenges us to live with a deep sense of trust in God's perfect timing, even when our circumstances appear to contradict the reality of what we expect. The struggles and delays we encounter in life often push us into a space of uncertainty. We are accustomed to taking control, to rushing through life, and to dictating the pace at which we progress. But there comes a moment in a believer's journey where they must step back and embrace the fact that God's timing is better than their own. We live in a world that encourages quick results and immediate gratification. From the internet to social media, everything is instantaneous, and we have been conditioned to expect that things should happen quickly. But God's timing is often counterintuitive to our worldly expectations. The journey toward God's promises can take time, and this process is often marked by waiting. Yet in this waiting, there is an opportunity for God to build something in us that could not be developed any other way. While we might be fixated on the what or the how of our circumstances, God is working on the who in us. He is shaping us, refining us, and preparing us for the blessings he has set aside for us. The understanding that God knows when frees us from the burden of worrying about the future or trying to manipulate situations. We can't force things to happen when it's not the right time. We can't rush healing, we can't accelerate growth, and we can't create success prematurely. But when we rest in the truth that God knows when the right time will come, we begin to experience peace in the midst of uncertainty. Trusting in God's timing is not about passivity, but about active faith. It means continuing to serve, continuing to seek him, continuing to do the work he has called us to, even when we don't see immediate results. The beauty of God knows when is that it assures us that we are not left to our own devices. There is a divine schedule that has been set in place, one that is orchestrated by a God who loves us and who is fully invested in our well-being. He is not indifferent to our struggles or our dreams. His knowledge of when the right moment will arrive is rooted in a deep understanding of what is needed to fulfill his purpose for our lives. This means that while we may not understand why we are waiting or why things aren't happening as quickly as we want them to, we can trust that God is working things out for our good and his glory. Moreover, the phrase God knows when highlights the importance of patience. The Bible is full of promises, and while we may hold on to them, we must recognize that God's promises unfold in his time. The challenge for believers is to stay faithful and keep trusting, especially when the promise seems distant. It's in this place of waiting, of living with the tension of the unknown, that our faith is refined. Patience is not just about enduring, it is about growing and learning to trust God in ways we never have before. Ultimately, God knows when encourages us to let go of our timeline and surrender to his. When we realize that God has everything under control, we no longer feel like we are at the mercy of time. We are not victims of circumstances, but participants in a divine plan that is unfolding. And in that plan, God has not forgotten us. He is not indifferent to our prayers. He has already set the perfect time for everything to fall into place. When that moment arrives, we will see that it was the best time that was chosen by the Creator, who sees the end from the beginning and who is working all things together for our good. The phrase God knows when invites us into a profound understanding of divine sovereignty and perfect timing. It serves as a reminder that we are not at the mercy of chance or fate, but rather under the watchful eyes of a God who has a perfect plan for our lives. One of the greatest challenges in life is navigating the uncertainties of the future, especially when we don't know what's coming or when it will arrive. But the comfort in God knows when is that it reassures us that God is never caught off guard, and he has a set time for everything in our lives. God's knowledge of when is not just about timing in the sense of when a particular event will happen, but also about knowing the right moment for us to step into the blessings he has prepared. Often we feel ready for something before God does. We think we are prepared for the next step, but God, in his infinite wisdom, understands that we need a little more time to nurture or to be shaped in ways that will ensure we are ready for what's coming. His timing is about preparing us, not just the event or circumstance, and that preparation takes time. We can rest in the fact that when the moment is right, we will be more than ready, and it will not come a moment too soon or a moment too late. The concept of God knows when also calls us to trust in his will. even when the process is difficult or unclear. It's easy to lose faith during times of waiting. We pray, we work, we hope, but sometimes it feels like nothing is happening. We wonder if God has forgotten us, or if he's even listening. But the truth is, while God may not answer when we want him to, he's always working behind the scene. His silence does not mean his inactivity. It simply means that he is at work in ways we cannot yet see or understand. Our job is not to rush him, but to trust in his timing, knowing that when he acts, it will be exactly what we need and exactly when we need it. God knows when also highlights the importance of living in the moment, embracing the process, and being fully present in the here and now. Often, we are so focused on the future that we miss the lessons and growth happening in the present. If we are always looking ahead, we miss the opportunities God is giving us in the current season. The waiting period is not a time of idleness, it is a time of preparation. God is doing something in us even when it seems like nothing is happening externally. Our character is being shaped, our faith is being strengthened, and our trust is being refined. It is in this waiting that God is working his will in our hearts, teaching us patience, perseverance, and trust. In the grand scheme of life, God knows and reminds us that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. We are part of God's eternal plan, and our individual stories are just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The timing of our lives is intricately connected to God's greater purpose, and he knows exactly when each piece of the puzzle needs to fall into place. When we embrace this truth, we can find peace in knowing that we are not in control of the timing, but we can trust the one who is. Finally, God knows when is a statement of faith. It says, I may not understand, but I trust that God does. It's an invitation to surrender our timelines, our schedules, and our expectations to the one who holds time in his hands. It calls us to believe that even when we don't see the full picture, we can trust that God has a perfect plan. This confidence is the foundation of our faith, and it encourages us to wait with hope and expectation, knowing that the when will come at just the right moment. And when it does, it will be a blessing far beyond what we could have imagined.